Hey guys, welcome back to Kingdom College. It's Celine and we'll be going through a selective preparation power reading test 40 today. So before we begin, just some key points. So I'd like to understand figurative language in this example. So figurative language is communicating in creative means. Usually figurative language is not supposed to be taken in a literal sense. So consider things like metaphors and symbolism. Right? It's usually a little bit beyond the actual item, event, or person. It's always got a deeper meaning, or it enhances the meaning of the text. Secondly, I'd like to understand the placement of sentences. So we will be doing a closed passage today, and that'll be about half of this test. So for the placement of sentences, I'd like us to consider fluency. So when we talk to people, we don't immediately jump to like our conclusions and such. We build up to it, right? Maybe if you're trying to bargain with your guardians or something, right? Like you want to go to a party on Saturday, you think about all the good things you've done and you lead up to why you should be able to go to the party on Saturday. So just some things I'd like you guys to consider as we are reading. I'll be underlining some key words, and yeah, we'll get started. So for our first text, we have it up on the board. It's called Seymour. I'd like you guys to read this in your own time. We have roughly like three main characters here. We have Seymour, Thelma, and Seymour's mother. Seymour lives presumably with the family, whilst his younger sister Thelma works full time, and Seymour is unemployed. In the middle of the extract, we see the mother actually lecturing Seymour. Okay, so for the first question, the writer describes the hands of the clock as stumbling to show that what? So already we can identify a technique, and this technique would probably be personification, because clocks do not stumble, humans stumble, animals stumble, right? We trip over, but clocks, they just tick and they work, and they tell us the time, right? Visually, not orally, by the way. So when we think of stumbling as well, we're thinking of somebody tripping, right? They're tripping over their words, they're tripping physically, they're taking a really long time to just function or walk. So in this case, time was passing slowly for Seymour, so the answer would be C, because stumbling means to trip over, and because you are tripping over, you're going much more slowly. And this also makes sense in terms of the context, because Seymour is unemployed, he's not really doing much with his life. So when you're not doing much, time goes by very slowly. So this is actually a very interesting way of communicating that time is passing very slowly and nothing is going on in Seymour's life. So this is an example of personification, i.e. figurative language. For question 2, which of the following statements is based on evidence in the passage? So I underlined evidence because that means that the question wants us to directly engage with the text. So if for example, if we were ever given a question where it asks us like to highlight or underline, usually you'll get that like in class questions, you should be able to underline and highlight like exactly where you got that piece of evidence. So let's just take a look at the extract I've put up on the board. So in the extract I've put up on the board, we've got a very organized description of the kitchen. We can see that inanimate objects like canisters seemed capable of disapproval if you put them back in the wrong places. So personification is used once again. Canisters, they are inanimate objects, they're like little bowls, right? So they can't actually disapprove or approve, right? You just use them. And it seems as if they're very orderly and organized, and if you put them in the wrong place, then they're going to be very unhappy. So we can tell that there is a system in this kitchen, right? So we can deduce that it's B. Thelma's kitchen was very organized. Options like A, Thelma had other guests staying in her house, isn't true, because there's only 3 people in the extract and we're not given enough information. If we were, then possibly. For C, Seymour's mother used to work with Thelma. We have no evidence of this. We get a lecture from Seymour's mother, but that's about it. D, Thelma appreciates Seymour's kindness towards her. These two characters don't directly interact with one another in the extract, so we can't really see this, and also there's no mention of that. So if it's not mentioned, and we can't like even just find a specific sentence or phrase, like we did for the answer B with the canisters. By the way, that is not the only example. That's just one of the examples I chose to deconstruct with you guys. Then it can't be an answer if you can't underline or highlight it, because the question is asking us based on the evidence. Cool. So this is the closed passage that we'll be working on. Please screenshot and read this. I will put the options side by side so that as we complete these questions, you will also have the option to look at the sentences. Okay, so for this closed passage, we are given a speech about Australia. We're given a speech about the environment, Australian women, Korean Australian women. So we're just gonna take a look at the speech as a whole. Please note that in question 3, we have to fill in the introductory paragraph, but it's in the last sentence. So we kind of just want a sentence that wraps up the introduction, really. So in the intro, there's just some Aboriginal land acknowledgements, as well as acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. So in this case, it would be appropriate to, I guess, mention anyone who has maybe given their life or devoted a lot of time and effort to the land. So if we take a look at our options, like B, we must acknowledge our wrongdoings, the suffering. So this is hopes for the future, but it's not really wrapping up who has given so much to like the land, right? But C, right, to all those young Australians who for so many reasons will be forever young in all our minds. So this kind of sums up like those Australians, particularly young Australians who have died or who have suffered to, I guess, better Australia. They're just saying that we acknowledge that we appreciate the effort and the sacrifice, really. So in this case, sentence C or option B would be appropriate. By the way, in case you guys have forgotten, it would be appropriate for you guys to circle your option. So like I've underlined the answer in question 3. And then when you actually get to the closed passage, if you'd like to, you can actually write down the A, B, C, or D options, not the whole A to G, just A to D. So the 4 letters that we're really looking at. For the following paragraph, so that includes questions 4 and 5, we start to move on to the topic of Australia's future. So we would want sentences that, I guess, communicates the present and perhaps the hopes of the future for Australia. So they introduced the topic of the future, but we still want to build up to it a little bit. So that's kind of what the sentence in question 4 is trying to do, trying to say like, well, here we are now, like we are, this is how we view our nation, how we view our future. So when we look at this sentence, we want to describe, I guess, well, what is Australia like now? And we're going to take a look at our options, right? So I would say like A is not a good sentence because it goes to Australian women in particular, but I think that's a little bit too much of a jump, right? We don't know what Australia is like at the current moment. C, we've chosen this already, but this C is on the topic of like the past and acknowledging the past, so that's not a good option either. For E, it has a very strong focus on the environment, and at the moment we're not talking about the environment. Even if we look at the sentence before 4 and after 4, we're looking at something that may describe, I guess, the demographic or at least the structure of Australian society nowadays. So G would be a good option because it tells us that it explicitly tells us that Australia has dramatically changed. So that's a good sentence to look at. Then afterwards, because we start talking about the the Asian Australian demographic. Later on, the author mentions that they are also Korean. But anyway, let's look at question 5 for now. So for question 5, right, we can acknowledge the fact that Australia has become very multicultural, right? It's something that is changing and that the composer is quite happy about it. They feel as if, well, it's implied that there is a sense of belonging and such, but we could probably put in a sentence that shows that they are a non Australian born citizen in Australia. So we want a sentence that introduces that, and the only sentence that does introduce that would actually be D. I'm proud to be a part of a multicultural Australia. I was born in South Korea and am part of a very multicultural family. Yeah, so we're not we're not looking for a sentence that goes super in depth to it. Like for example, F, right? F is a little bit too deep at the moment, I guess, because we don't even know like who the composer is. So we want to introduce who the composer is before we even like get into the really nitty-gritty topics of this, especially because it's such a personal speech. For question 6 and 7, it's a new paragraph, so new topic. For the first paragraph, we acknowledge the past. For the second paragraph, we're starting to look at the present and the future. In question 6, we actually delve into much more deeper topics such as racism and prejudice. So that is actually describing the present, and it kind of does flow from paragraph 2 because it's describing what Australia is a little bit like now. So for question 6, first sentence of a new paragraph, we want like a topic sentence, something that tells us the overarching ideas of the text already. So if we take a look at our options, right, since we know we're going to be talking about racism because of the second sentence, I know this hasn't always been the case, and I know we have to keep working on tolerance and understanding between us all. We want a sentence that talks about racism. So for example, we can take a look at C, right? C, which we have already used. This one acknowledges the past, right? But it doesn't mention anything about racism. If we take a look at D, I'm proud to be part of multicultural Australia. I was born in South Korea. So this is a little bit too detailed, and it's also not on the topic of racism. This is on the topic of, well, where was the composer from? Is Australia multicultural? But we're not asking that. We're asking something about racism. Sentence E, we know that to secure our future, we have to care for our rivers. This is in the topic of the environment. And then for option F, whether you're born here or overseas, it does not take long for you to become a part of Australia to feel that you belong. So this directly talks about not necessarily like racism on the dot, but it implies that there needs to be a sense of belonging, right? In order for you to really be a part of a country. And because we're saying like, oh, this hasn't always been the case, it's a good flow. It's a good flow of sentences because we introduce the topic of belonging, but then we also say, well, this hasn't always been the case. So then that flows very well on the topic of racism. So in this case, the answer would be sentence F, option D. For question 7, we aren't necessarily like moving on from the topic of racism. We're using, well, I guess we're combining the ideas of both racism and sexism. I say this because in the beginning of the paragraph, we quite explicitly talk about the sense of belonging that people need to have in order to, I guess, be a part of a culture's identity. And that's explicitly stated by saying like the tolerance. So I think that would, I think that's a good introduction because it talks about the racism and the I guess prejudices of some Australians. And then the composer moves on specifically to a particular group, which is Australian women. So the sentence before that talks about great sense of equality between the sexes. So that already introduces like between the sexes, like sexism, right? So female and male, as of now at least, just the biological sexes, not the genders, by the way. Anyway, then we have question 7, and then afterwards, it details they have struggled for equality, for recognition and acknowledgement for their own aspirations as women, right? So as women, and then they start detailing like their own experiences, like as a young woman in 2001, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's look at option A. Australian women have made a great contribution to Australia and to the world in the past 100 years. This is a great sentence to put in because it directly talks about Australian women, and also later on in the paragraph, right? The sentence after the they have struggled for equality for recognition sentence. So I hope that in 100 years time, when Australians gather here once again, right, it's a reference to like the 100 years ago, right? So A would be a good option. C in this case wouldn't be good because it acknowledges the past. We're looking at women in particular. E talks about the environment, so that's not a good option. And then G talks about I guess like federation, right? So we're not really talking about federation at the moment, we're talking about women. So we want everything to be on the same topic, and racism and sexism or any prejudices, right, have a very nice easy flow because it's talking about the injustices and social issues of the world. So please just keep that in mind in your paragraphs, because I know that I usually say like, oh, new topic every paragraph, but these two ideas flow very well with one another, and the way that this composer has written about it is like it's just molded in very nicely, whilst also having that nice personal touch. So yeah. And then in the final paragraph, we actually start talking about the environment. So the sentence before question 8, the environment is an issue which has increasingly become a focus of concern for young Australians. And then the sentence after that talks about the solutions and what we could possibly do. So we just want a sentence that talks about the environment, and the only sentence that talks about the environment would be E. So the answer would be sentence E, option C. Okay, we know that to secure our future, we have to care for our rivers, the air we breathe, and the places we have taken for granted as our national parks or our forests and our oceans. So this sentence directly acknowledges environments, and there really isn't any other option that we can choose because, well, if we're talking about the environment, then we shouldn't put in a sentence that talks about women or racism, right? Unless you're on the topic of like environmental racism, but we're not. So as we were answering these questions in the closed passage, I hope you guys just kind of took a look at, well, we can't put certain sentences in the middle of a paragraph because we're not talking about that. So consider that when you have things like fluency, even in your extended responses, we're looking for something that I guess flows, right? And lastly, we have this poem, the sonnet, so Morning by Pablo Neruda, sorry. So we've just got a lot of, I would say, visual imagery and personification. This is a very dreamy poem, I would say. A lot of poetry is like this as well. Very romantic, it romanticizes the environment. Just very feel-good poem, in my opinion. So let's take a look at understanding the figurative language that they've used, and also some techniques. So you will remember that leaping stream is an example of which language device. So I underlined leaping stream because that's actually the part that we should focus on. Leaping stream is an example of personification. The reason for this is because streams do not leap. Okay, they do in a figurative sense, right? Like perhaps if there's water flowing through them, right? There's like a leaping, like jumping motion, right? But if you want to claim something like streams, they jump on their own or they leap on their own, like as if they are an actual person, that's not true because, well, humans can leap, like frogs can leap, right? But streams, they do not. Okay. So for question 10, what is the effect of the line shadows and silent water? So shadows and silent water, it's got a very peaceful image, right? I think it's really emphasized with the silent water part, okay? When water is like silent, you would expect like still water. And when there's still water, you would assume that there isn't that many I guess like distractions, right? There's not a lot of splashing or like I guess like moving about. It's just it's quiet, right? And when you think about shadows as well, some people might interpret that as something that's scary, you know, because it's dark, right? But if you combine shadows with like a water that is not moving a lot, you get a tranquil image because it just means that perhaps like the sun is shining on the water, right? Or maybe you're looking over at the water. It's just a very nice feeling, a nice image. So the answer in this case would be A. It creates a dreamlike atmosphere of peace and tranquility. All for today. I hope you guys were able to understand the figurative language and the placement of sentences. Please keep in mind the techniques to use and how it elevates the meaning, and also how sentences should be on the same topic rather than just placed randomly, and that is communicated through fluency, paragraphs, and like being, I guess, just on topic. Anyway, I will hopefully see you guys in the next video, and for those of you going on holiday, please have a fun and safe holiday, and I'll see you guys next year or whenever I see you, I guess. All right, bye.